now for our main topic this week, we are going to finish our look at the Shadowdark role-playing game. We've taken a few episodes to go through the player-facing content and the basic rules of the game. So now we're going to look at the section meant for game masters. So we start out with a section that I really love. The prose of it, the tone of it, it's almost poetic in places.
Yeah.
Every once in a while, I'll go, yes, 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 and then I'll go, no. But then I'll go, yes, yes, yes. Because it's a lot of like short, terse advice that rings true, but sometimes it's more of a truism than a truth. But that's okay, because I love the tone of it. What are some of the things, Teos, that you read in this section that sort of stands out?
Yeah, there's some great quotes like, you want only one thing, to see your players triumph. And then I think to myself, why are we murdering them? The only rule is that you make the rules. What is written in this book is a guide, not a constraint, and none of it takes precedence over your judgment. And then the pact. You and your players are gaming together to have fun, prop each other up, and strengthen bonds, right? And so it is good. I think a lot of it, is trying to speak to things that the industry has done poorly over time, especially in the older editions of D&D. So it is important to really spend some time on this, talking about your role and the players themselves. So overall, it's good. At times, I think to myself, well, boy, I'd like a little more explanation behind this statement to make it align with your actual gameplay versus just being a recommendation for how to approach games in general.
Yeah, it's a shorthand for people that have already read the book.
Yeah.
Not this book, but all the other books.
Yeah, all the books.
Right. Here are some things that we've become aware of over the 50 years of role-playing games that we've made and played and loved. And there's always an argument about the game master's always right versus right, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
The game master can do anything they want. And so this book is using just quick, short bursts of information to show where it stands on that question. And sometimes it's contradictory.
Yeah.
Right. The only rule is that you make the rules. That does that negate the other, 330 pages of the book?
Mm-hmm.
Because if the only rule is you make the rules, then that's all you need is just you make the rules. Now, obviously,
Right.
what
Yeah.
it means is use the rules in a way that is pleasing to you, your players, and the experience.
Yeah.
So,
I mean,
a little
and
glib, but I get the point.
I can cite numerous Jeremy Crawford interviews where he has tried to say for 5e, hey, it's up to you, the DM, to which most fans say, yes, but write the rules well, and so, there's always that give and take of like, it is good advice, right? Fundamentally, it is good advice. The whole ruling's not rules, and you get to, you're the final say and run the game you want it. Totally true. Does not remove the necessity of the rules making sense, being consistent, pointing to each other, all that other thing. But yes, sure, like it's valuable to state it here. And there's some parts here, like on the players page, it says, it tries to speak to kind of how to make them be motivated. And so it says like adventure hooks. You're encouraging the players to grab onto those threads and make the call to adventure more enticing by knowing what your players want. And that works well at a surface level. But if I try to think, well, great, give me an example of this, right? Then I don't know what that is. Like, I don't necessarily know what the next step, what is an adventure hook? What does it look like in Shadowdark? In a game where I'm kind of exploring around in caverns and dungeons, what should that particularly be for this game? And I don't get that here. Now, of course, I can make that up. I can figure it out. I can look at published adventures. But again, this is a place where there could be more. And the game is being very brief, right?
Yeah. And it's the same thing I said before, right? This book is not for new DMs. This is not a book for new. And I've at first I was like, but, and now I've given up on the but and just I'm like, okay,
Yeah.
this book is a one part of an ongoing 50-year conversation. So it is giving good advice for people who know the advice but need to be reminded of the
Yeah.
advice.
Yeah.
Uh, so yes, give them good adventure hooks.
Yeah.
It is great advice. How do you do it? Go to all the other books you've ever read to figure that out.
Hmm.
Give them
Yeah.
treasure and XP. Yeah. So, some games don't do that anymore
Yeah. And I
or
think
have gotten away from that.
what I
So
yeah, and what I might have said here is or wanted to see here is in a game that's specifically often about dungeon exploration or underground exploration, have periodic arcs of story and goals that have various, completion times so that it isn't just roam around, stab stuff, solve stuff, but rather that there's a story element to it.
yeah.
And I think that's a very important thing to say in a game that could be mistaken for being just about sort of loot things, take treasure, right? Like take treasure, kill stuff. And that maybe that's what I would have liked to have seen here is a little more of speaking to that. Hey, this isn't a game that's just that, right?
Mhm.
Because then
Right.
the game falls apart.
Make them light a torch.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, and
Yeah.
things like that, I mean, are important. Like there's a piece here on dramatic questions. Most encounters have a simple yes no question driving the interest. When that question is answered, it's no longer exciting. Move forward. The question isn't whether a troll guarding a bridge can be killed by the characters, but whether the characters can get across. And so that's very few words trying to carry a lot, right? But that idea that the game is more than just slaying, the game should have the hooks, the questions, the encounters should have some complexity and flexibility to them, right? That there's a lot there this is trying to say efficiently, which is very admirable, but hard to do.
Yeah, and I will say what I just said before, right? This is the perfect example of I'm going to choose a game at random, Dungeon World or Powered by the Apocalypse or Fate, right? Those are games that in some cases come right out and say you are playing to answer a question. Once
Yeah.
the question has been answered, move on. Uh, rather than fighting out this fight to the death or what have you. And
Yeah.
so this is just drawing from that spring of game hardware technology and
Mhm.
bringing it in uh, without explaining the whole point behind it, which it expects you to already know from these other games.
Right. Right. Like if you've played AD&D and had a situation where your DM never tells you that you're done searching the room, right? And I think those of us who've been around a long time, we've had those games or even those campaigns. And
Yeah.
it drives you wild, until you then reach another DM that does it so differently and you go, "Oh, this is how to run a game."
Yeah.
But and so yeah, I agree that this is almost like just thinking that you understand this in the background. So, yeah.
Yep. It also tells us that the players are the audience to the game stories,
Mm.
not the characters. So you want to do things that will resonate with the players rather than just resonate with the characters, which is good advice. And I've seen game masters, and probably myself included, that forget that sometimes, get so bogged down in the rules and in the intricacies of a design that you forget that there are players sitting there waiting to be entertained and thrilled and listened to.
Yeah. Yeah. And who like different things, right? We've talked about player types in the past, and it matters whether you are into exploration or role play or combat or what the mix is between those areas. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah. I think of some players that want to be entertained by the game master as well.
Yeah.
So the book here gives a great example of rolling a random encounter in front of the players to give that sense of tension, to build up that sense of tension. And sometimes, especially if you're running in a timed environment, you may forget that, right?
Right.
You may forget that the experience is happening to the players, not just the characters. So you want to add some theatrics, maybe
Yeah.
add some things that will please worry in a good way
Yeah.
the audience at the table, which are your players.
Totally.
So we got through the role of the GM and player section. Now we get to the core ethos, which is multiple and manifold. It's time, darkness, gear, action economy, information, distance, danger, rewarding investment, stat checks.
And I mean, imagine that you were to tell me, "Hey, I'm writing a role-playing game.
Mhm.
I'm gonna give the core elements of the game about a sentence or two each."
Mhm.
But that's what this
20 words or less.
I mean, it's amazing. Like there's just one page with your core aspects, right? And it because it's just sort of loose guidelines around, respect the darkness. It is the true foe. Time is the most important resource. It must haunt the character's every decision. You don't have time to check everything. Like, gear is precious and limited. One action per turn. Precise measurements aren't needed. The game is dangerous. Reward investment. It's really kind of amazing how the game does this. It's
Yeah.
really incredible.
Yep. And again, it goes back to this game is for people who have played other games and understand what all of these things mean
Yeah.
without needing 10 pages to describe each.
And that's not to say that you can't be new and work off of this perfectly, but it is rests on that foundation and assumes it. The section on balance is also really interesting, where it's kind of like be unpredictable, but it doesn't exactly tell you, how to do that. Just be unpredictable. The numbers are sort of a starting point, and then work off of that, and telegraph danger and make choices matter. Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, I will be running, I will not running, I will be playing this game at GaryCon in 2 weeks.
Oh, cool.
So I will have more to say, even if it's briefly after I play.
Yeah.
But it's easy to be unpredictable when the game itself has little care for the lives of the characters.
Mm.
Uh, so yeah, I would love to be completely wild and wacky and unpredictable in the stories that I tell in all games, but some games need more balance than others.
For sure. For sure.
And so this game can lean into being imbalanced and unpredictable. I don't know if you need to telegraph the danger. It sounds like the danger is pretty well telegraphed.
I mean, it's all dangerous. They'll learn quickly.
Yeah.
But I think the idea is that where they're trying to get here is that the gameplay is supposed to be on what do you do about this danger, not, oh, hey, this danger surprised you. Mm-hmm. Not that the dangers don't surprise you through random encounters and things like that, but and that's, I think, what's behind the, like, if you think this square is trapped and you check it, you find the trap, because it's not about the haha gotcha. It's about did you pick up on the thing in the room description such that you check for the trap, right? It's the what do you do about it?
Well, it's the entertain the players.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It's bring the players into the game by talking about the scratch marks on the floor.
Right.
That will trigger the player, not the character, to say, okay, I checked the floor.
Yeah.
Because by checking the floor, you succeed unless there's a time limit or something is imperiling you at the moment to call for your character to make the check. So that's what this telegraph danger means, because it brings the player into the game.
Yeah, and something that's interesting is, so this section has so far been advice, heavily advice, right? It's not a rules section of how to run the game, and we get a running the game section. And I think to myself, oh, okay, this is gonna be full of it, but it kind of continues with advice: what an adventure is, what a campaign is, how to run NPCs, make the mundane matter. Like, your gear should always matter no matter what level you are. And then it gets into setting DCs. And suddenly we have a little bit of rules, right? The DCs are easy, 9, normal, hard, extreme. Each one goes up by 3. So between 9 and 18 for sort of your typical 4 DCs. And then it says, take the person making the check into account. So an elf has an easier time finding a trail than a sun-dazzled cave troll. So, and what this is doing is, in other games, you might have skill ranks and so on, so that things, this is what I'm good at. Here, the DM is instructed to compensate, right? The cave troll that's outside in the sunlight can't find the trail, and so the DC might be extreme, but the elf has sharp eyes and is good at this sort of stuff, so maybe it's easy. Your call, right? And that's really very interesting, I thought.
Yeah. And that sort of, again, flips back and forth between if you look for something, you find it.
Yeah.
If you look in the right place versus if you can't look in the right place or you can't do it quickly or if you can't take your time to do it or if there's a danger around you at the time, then make the check. So we get sort of more advice that these are the DCs, but only use them when it's not an automatic success. When's it an automatic success? I don't know, except maybe I do, but I'm the DM, so I can make the rules anyway. And I'm not saying that to be flippant. It's just these are the things that run through a game master's head as they are leading a group of players through an adventure, regardless of the system. So you just have to take the system's advice into account as best you can.
And an interesting part is it makes the point in this not the enemy section that you are a neutral arbiter, but says that because the idea is in this game of Shadowdark, the players are sort of in control of their difficulty, it says. So, you decide whether to push your luck. The conscience of this game is you decide whether to keep going, right? Your light might run out. You might be fighting the darkness on the way back. You might run into random encounters because your luck turns and suddenly you're overwhelmed. You have decisions like, do I give up a couple of torches to open up some gear slots to carry treasure so I can leave with more XP? All of this is sort of creating toggles the players can choose, to which I say, yes, but, certainly when I ran the Gauntlet session recently, boy, we weren't making these kinds of choices. The adventure was just beating us up. And sometimes that's just the way it goes, especially with few characters in the party. It can be that the players aren't controlling that toggle. Like this game is random enough in multiple ways that it's not as simple as the characters just choosing to push their luck or not. They could, and that's been true of a lot of classic games, right? I ran lots of AD&D sessions where it was great. We returned to the Temple of Elemental Evil. You encounter wolves along the way. They slaughter you. You go back to town again. The players were being cautious. It didn't matter. They encountered wolves, too many, and they got murderized,
Yep. To say that it's the character's choice about how hard to make it requires a very balanced game, right? The MCDM game, if you've played a preview of it, right? They have a specific mechanic in place called victories, where if you get a victory, it gives you more power going forward, but you also have fewer resources in terms of hit points and recoveries and so on. So that is a game that's carefully balanced to make that true of we're going to push our luck because we have more power at our disposal, even though we have less health and those sorts of resources. It can be true in this, but if it's not pinpoint balanced, it becomes less true, as you've been saying, Teos.
So we get a few more sections here that are kind of, advice for the game master. There's a Let There Be Darkness section that gives you ideas on how to threaten torches. There's a light mishaps table of things that can happen, ideas that enemies could try to extinguish your torches, spellcasters could target it with spells such as Dispel Magic to end light, the environment like gusts of wind and things like that. And then we get this modes of play that came up in our question. These are really quick brief ideas on what you can do, right? Things like the light only lasts 30 minutes, not an hour. Reroll initiative at the start of every combat mode. And these all have names, like Blitz mode is the light timers. Chaos is rerolling initiative every start. Fatality mode, you die at 0 hit points. Hunter mode, defeated monsters grant half your XP, or grant XP equal to half their level, round down. Pulp mode, which gives you lots of tokens. What do you think of this, Shawn, especially kind of given our question?
Yeah, given the question, I think it it does it does it tries to do a job that is very admirable,
Yeah.
which is say you can play this many different ways and you can tweak it and you have all these buttons and bells and whistles and you can do these things. But unless you've actually run the game, you don't know the starting point.
Sure. Yeah.
And without a game being very well balanced, this sort of tweaking of something could work very, very well, but you might never know why it worked.
Mm-hmm.
It could
Yeah.
accidentally work well. It could have the opposite effect.
Yeah.
You don't know. And again, if you're making the rules as the game master, then all of these are just sort of suggestions that you could do anyway, rather than being actual modes of play. So
Yeah.
it's good to know, it's good to be told you can do these things. I just don't know how they would work. Even if I'd run 30 games of Shadowdark, I still might not understand how this would actually affect play.
I mean, looking at a couple of the published adventures, official ones even, um, to me, which adventure I choose will have more effect on the game than these modes of play.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And if I use a certain mode of play with one adventure, it'll be a sad time. and
Yes.
on the other hand, would make it great. Like probably my favorite of these is pulp mode, because this idea of having lots of luck token capabilities, like starting every session with 1d4 luck tokens, right? That would help in some of the situations I've had with the harder adventures that have been difficult, and would probably just make gameplay more pulpy and fun and hijinks in the easier games that I've had. Like that's one that I could see that I think to me works a little better. But some of the others are a little tougher, and thing like hunter mode, if you're fighting level 1 monsters, half XP is 0, so you wouldn't really benefit from it, and so it's only the harder ones, but you might not be able to take, it gets into that kind of question. We get a section on random encounters, and there are a couple of tables that are helpful, like starting distance, what is the creature doing? I like that a lot, right? Just as a general, like, hey, they're not just always just ready to murder you. But then we get a section on reaction checks, and sort of like with 5e's playtest rules, I wasn't super satisfied by this, partly because it has a weird disconnect to me, and 5e does this as well, of the timing of the reaction check. So, I know how far away they are. I know what they're doing. Like maybe they're building or nesting, right, as a result on the table. But now I'm told, roll to see what their attitude is, which could be hostile, suspicious, neutral, curious, or friendly. And then if the characters immediately interact with the creatures, they can add their charisma modifier to that check. So it's almost like you got to write this down on a piece of paper and then see if the players do anything and then alter it. I don't know that. I don't love that. I'd rather go back to what they're doing and play off of what they're doing.
Yeah. Because this is just a random check, I see this more as a prompt or as a suggestion rather than as a rule. It's like, okay, you find horrible trolls who are eating, but I rolled double sixes on my check, so they're friendly. Okay, so now I'm going to kick in, why are they friendly? Oh, they're friendly because the last group that came through gave them food, and so they think they're going to get more food from you. So I can use that as a prompt. If this was being used to sort of create an adventure, not just a random encounter, I would like it less. But as it is, it's just sort of out there to give you something to start with.
Right.
Yeah. What else do we have here? we have the
Trap?
treasure. Oh, the treasure. There's a 50%
Yeah.
chance that random creatures will not have treasure. So that is to stop you from getting too much XP from just random encounters
Yeah.
because it wants you to attack the meat of the adventure to get your bonuses and your rewards.
Um, We get a couple tables on traps and hazards. Most should have a hint or a tell. If you search the area, you find it. Thieves are trained in traps. If there is a pressure, you make a check. Otherwise, you disable it. So I think the idea is that if we're in combat and I know that there's a thing here, a lever, whatever, a trap mechanism that I could disable, then I probably have to make a check, which we see in the example of play. But if I'm outside of combat, then it's just disable it. And it's good to see that, but it sort of takes it kind of is not fully addressed in several places, and you have to kind of read them all to understand that. But it is a nice table of sort of just neat ideas and the effects they can have and how a hazard might weaken you. Interesting concepts.
Yeah, I saw the trap chart table and I was like, okay, cool. And then I looked, I was like, okay, if you roll a 1, it's a crossbow and it's a d6 damage. So, all right, you're taking 3 points of damage. Okay. And then if you roll a 12, it's a cursed statue that casts a spell on you and does 3d10 damage.
Yeah,
And I'm
or
like,
petrifies you.
well,
Yeah.
I'll just take the 3. It's between 3 and 15 points of damage from a trap, depending on what you roll with that d12. That seems rough.
Yeah, and I mean that's where it's all levels of play, and it's not accounting for how many
Yeah.
people are in the party and that kind of thing. And so I guess that's why you better have a tell that this statue looks weird because you know. But and that's a thing that I think this game I wish addressed. I think because to me it's some of the great play comes when you can as a DM understand the system well enough to know how to play off of it, right? So if this statue is super dangerous, but I give it a tell, and now they know to check the thing to disable it, and they're going to always succeed outside of combat, my gameplay will become very boring and repetitious. This thing is a really dangerous thing. You check it, you disable it, moving on. So how do I make that interesting? And if you are a very experienced DM, well, then you will have a lot of ideas at your disposal because you've done a lot of things like this. But if you're new, you may not quite understand it, and you may just go, well, okay, I'm going to stop giving tells. And then you're murderizing some of your characters. And,
Right.
That's that kind of balance there.
Yep. We also get hazards then, another table with hazards that are passive dangers, it's called, in the environment that you're going to be adventuring in. These do things more like restrict movement rather than do large amounts of damage, but they're still interesting hazards. There's 3 columns, one for movement, one for damage, and one for weakening. Uh, it's interesting, but I don't know what they mean, especially weaken. Certain hazards weaken or hamper the characters. This could include anti-magic zones or vapors that sap physical strength. So if I roll, okay, I want to weaken them and I roll an 8, it's numbing cold. But as a GM, I don't quite know what that means. Was there a weakened state that I don't remember reading about, even though I've read this? Yeah.
Yeah, there are monsters that drain abilities. So my guess is that that's what it's sort of talking about, but it's hard to say. And I guess the idea is, you decide, you come up with it, but do you know whether to do something that would be the right level of challenge for your party? I don't know.
Yeah.
So the next section,
we hear about go ahead.
The next section is the Gauntlet. And the idea here is that you use random generation to create 4 random 0 level PCs. Each player does this. So you've got 4 0 level PCs, not first level. If you fall to 0 hit points, you're dead. If all 4 of yours die, roll d4 and make that many new characters. But you only play 1 at a time. And then you'll get 1 from the backup pool at some appropriate moment. And we're told to run this with brutal traps, lots of monsters, and many will likely cause casualties. So much for that tell or easily avoided. It's it's about murderizing the players. The PC that survives becomes your PC. And so I had heard good things about this, and I asked Mike Shea what he recommended, and he recommended an adventure that's in the third of the zines that are officially published by Arcane Library. And I ran that Norse adventure, and we lost, I forget the exact numbers, but it was something like 30 characters. No, it was a little less, like 25 characters, but I only had 3 players. It didn't say anything about scaling. And the 3 players had tons of deaths. And at first it was funny and we were laughing. But it's things like, like a 0 low character, it's random gear. So you may not have a weapon. You may have nobody has a torch, right? And they do give you a room early on that has some gear, but eventually that gear has been taken by the characters and things may happen, like we had some characters drown with a lot of the gear. So all the gear had left the system. And I even did things to try to help. Like I made up an NPC, because you're not really told exactly why you're coming here other than, get the one magic loot thing. So I came up with a seer in the village that was sending them all here. And she would periodically give them glimpses of what the other characters had done so that they could, find the gear and have a chance at surviving. Even then, we had so many deaths. I mean, every single room was just lethal. Even if they tried to sort of avoid it, things would go wrong. They died from swimming. They died from everything. And so eventually they went back there. I could tell they were a little frustrated. So I said, you go back to the seer, or you're brought before the seer. You are level 1 characters. And she says, well, now that we got rid of all the troublemakers in the village, you go be the heroes. They still had like another 4 character deaths before we got to the end. And it was way more brutal than I think the players wanted. There's a Reddit thread out there that has sort of a similar experience from one of our listeners. I don't know what to make of it, Shawn. I mean, I think probably a big deal was that we had 3 characters.
Mm-hmm. And a terrible DM.
And a terrible DM. And maybe we could have overwhelmed the numbers, foes. But I mean, just the foes did so much damage. And there are things like a random encounter that this thing attacks, twice in a round, kills a PC with, everything killed a PC with a hit. They have 1 to 4 hit points. They have con hit points, right? So it's just, it was, I don't know. I wanted it to be really fun. And one of our players was very familiar with the DC funnel. And that's in that version of this game, you get to, you bring all your characters and you get to therefore choose kind of which ones to hold back and try to keep alive and which ones to just use as fodder. They like that more, I think, than the Gauntlet. So I think the Gauntlet was a bit of a dud for my group. I don't know that obviously it can work. Mike had a great time running it, but yeah, it did not quite work for us. Yep. I didn't win people over to the system, sadly.
That's funny. Then the next section is awarding XP, and it tells you how to give your players and their characters experience points, which is what they use to then level up. So you get XP from treasure, which can be stuff of legend that doesn't have monetary value. There's 4 categories. Poor treasure, which gives you 0, such as a bag of silver or a used dagger. Normal, which gives you 1 XP, like a bag of gold, fine armor, or a magic scroll. And then fabulous and legendary. Fabulous would be a magic sword, a big diamond, mithril armor, whereas legendary is an artifact, a wish, a dragon's hoard, etc. You can get an extra experience point for clever thinking. And per treasure find, you are expected to find about 10 gold pieces times your level worth of treasure. We had a listener question that talked about this. And the question was, how do you give experience for gold? Well, we just sort of said it. You have to figure out what it equals. If it's a half a bag of gold, is that enough to be 1 experience point? If it's a big bag of gold, might that be 2 or 3 experience points? That sort of thing.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing to understand is that gold is really sort of there as it can be a source of XP when it's significant enough, but it's primarily meant to be the fuel for your downtime activities.
Mm.
And so it isn't, you don't need. I think honestly, the characters are probably end with plenty of gold very quickly, but it's more about that dual fuel of their various activities. The XP side of things is really kind of what generally we're thinking about when we're designing for Shadowdark. So we are thinking to ourselves, hey, there is some treasure here. Should it grant experience points? And if so, then maybe it's a bag of gold. And or maybe it's something else. But probably most things can be sold. So you're looking at getting gold out of it sort of regardless. But it's really about that thing being a unit of XP, right? So you're thinking about the adventure and thinking to yourself, hey, I'm going to have, a few things here. And then there's this fabulous treasure here that drives the story, like you must get this specific artifact and then end the threat, right? And so that is the legendary or whatever, the really cool reward that's going to give you a lot of XP based on your gold. Yeah, and there are links to XP and treasure from the monsters. So based on their level, as we'll talk about, there is a table there. And we're told it's not XP until converted. So really it means you've got to get back to town safely, right? Or at least leave the dangerous area. And then you would get the XP for it. You don't get XP, as I understand it, if you, got the cracked emerald, but then you lose it or give it to someone else. You need to get it out of that dungeon to really have it count as XP, unless you choose otherwise. But, yeah. We also had Random Wizard on Mastodon that heard that dividing gold values by 10 can allow old modules to be converted to Shadowdark pretty reasonably. If you're looking at the gold values in some of those adventures, though they tend to vary.
Yep. Awesome. Well, after the awarding XP section, we get tables. Lots of tables. Lots and lots of tables. 67 pages worth of tables with adventuring ideas and the something happens table and the make a Shadowdark map table and the shop generator, etc., etc. Random encounters for all different sorts of geological locations and terrains and so on and so on and so on. All good stuff, all stuff that you could use to randomly build yourself an adventure, an encounter, a world, etc.
Yeah, I mean, even
Then we get
if you're working on another game, you might be like, hey, I'm going to open up those Shadowdark tables and get some inspiration.
True. Then we get to the monster section where a page explains to us what the stat block is. We learn all non-humanoids can see in the dark, and humanoids can't. Table that to create monsters that fly, a table of monster mutations, a page and a half on how to design monsters. How many monsters do we use? There's a table based on PC level per PC on what level monsters to use and how many. We get advice to vary what they face. So 3 PCs of level 0 to 3 could face a combined 3 levels worth, split up based on the number of monsters. The monsters all tend to be very simple. The size of a small paragraph, a small stat block, if you will. Still, it reminds me of like first or AD&D first edition stat blocks with just a wee bit more content to it, because something might not have any special abilities. It just may be claw +3, 1d6 damage. That's it. But it might be 1d6 damage plus charm. And then you'd look down and the charm would be a couple sentences of what the charm means. So all in all, it does its job as simply as it possibly can, I think. So that's good.
Yep.
It's good design there.
Yep. Definitely when I was running it, it was easy to run the monsters, right? Every monster was simple, clear, did what it said it did on the box.
Yep. And last but not least, we get treasure. Treasure tables to determine random treasure. Treasure by character level ranges. If it's not guarded, we're told that treasure should be character level. Typical treasure will occupy 1 gear slot. And remember, you have a limited number of gear slots. So part of the fun is, do we try to haul all of this treasure out with the understanding that I might have to drop something important to do so, like a torch or a weapon?
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and do we risk random encounters on the way out, knowing that we're carrying all this treasure? Should we, that sort of thing. So it's fun in that sense of sort of treasure resource slot management.
Yeah, I'm curious because I've had a couple of characters in Shadowdark that had very few available slots, and I don't feel like I was carrying a ton of gear. And so I'm curious, if you get a magic item or two that you want to keep, like that's really helping you out, right? Like say you get, you've got your armor and you get a magical weapon, and you get maybe like two cool other things. Now your number of gear slots is really limited. So does that mean your adventures are shorter? Or do the players, because I have trouble believing the characters are going to drop magic items. So yeah, I'd be curious how that plays when people are playing campaigns. Let us know in the comments, what you have been encountering when you're, say, level 6 and you have a couple of neat things you found. What does that do to your gear slot capabilities?
With the understanding that you don't get XP if you don't get loot out
Right.
of the dungeon and back to town.
Right. And so, what do you do? Are you just trying to make lots of trips? And does that affect the play? And does your DM go no? Or I don't, what do you do balance wise there? It's interesting.
Yep. And then we get, the player's favorite part of any book, all the magic item descriptions and what they do. And so it's all there. And then at the end, we have a sample character sheet, and the inside cover has useful tables that are reprinted there for easy access. So we have made it through Shadowdark. Overall, I think what my thoughts are, when I heard my game design friends who I respect greatly telling me how great this game was, I came in with an expectation that I should not have come in with. I should have come in with the understanding that this is a system to play a certain kind of game for players that already like a certain kind of game, and will tweak things to fit their particular bent, not relying necessarily on the rules to make that experience for them. And in that, I think Kelsey did an absolutely amazing job of understanding the audience that she was catering this game toward, and very elegantly and gracefully pulling the needed material from not just D&D, but from other indie games into a system that could work together in a pleasing way for that audience that she was going for.
Yeah, that's great. That's on point. I had similar sort of thoughts. Reading the book when it arrived in the mail, I was really surprised that, hey, wow, the player side is super 5th edition, but distilled down. And how efficiently it was distilled. In a million years, I would never be able to distill 5th edition down to something this good. And it all works really well while honoring a lot of really neat OSR concepts and play styles. And so, like, I played Dragonbane this last Friday, and I had not played it before. So DM introduced us to it, and I played it. I haven't read it. And it was really interesting comparing that, because it is also a light game. And I've also played things like Morkborg or Vesson. There are a lot of games that are trying to be simple these days. And you can really hit the rub of what is that simple, what makes it simple, and how does it work over time. And Dragonbane has some pieces that seem to rub against each other. This game doesn't really have a lot of that. Like it manages to avoid pitfalls, which is, it's hard to state how easy it is to do that, right? I mean, 5e has that problem, but all these games that are trying to be simpler usually run into some issues. They may still be super fun, but they can run into some issues. There are some here around lethality, but none of it's really around the construction, the vision for the game. It's really a choice about how this game is written to give you a lot of ideas with few words, and have you play off of it and decide your style and your take off of it. And I think that it can be for a lot of people, and has been for a lot of people, a fantastic change away from a more dense game, whether it's 5e or something else, to to be one that's as well written as this is and has that kind of structure and elegance to it.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's a really neat thing. I'm ready for the second edition of it almost, because there have been things like the torch, right? The idea of like, oh, well, you randomize your torch timer, and I think the community is so active that the play for this book is through the roof, and so people have a lot of ideas, and the Cursed Scroll zines are adding to it and adding character classes and adding adventures and concepts and source books, and so there's a lot there that I could see that before too long, Kelsey might want to create a second edition, and the audience might be very receptive to that, to bring in all of these neat ideas. Most games that are out there don't get that kind of feedback, so there's nothing propels towards a second edition. This might really do it because it has such an active community, which comes off of how successful Kelsey has been at growing an audience. Well deserved.
Yeah. You can't make a second edition until I play the first edition. That's all. That's the only thing I ask.
Fair enough. Hey, Kelsey,
okay.
Could you hold off?
Yeah.
No.
And in our show notes, we have that interview that Kelsey did discussing the design of Shadowdark, the YouTube discussion. It's in our show notes. So, Teos, we're glad you're back. We're glad you're safe and sound physically, if not necessarily mentally. But it's good to see your face again. So thanks for sharing your insights, not just with Shadowdark, but the news as well with us. And we'd like to thank our patrons out there and all our listeners. If you're a listener but not a patron, you can help us out by becoming a patron by going to patreon.com/masteringdnd and joining us as a Master of Dungeon supporter, as a Master of Realms supporter, who get a shout out in our show notes, or a Master of the Multiverse patron who gets mentioned on the show right now as I mangle your name. Chris Webster, Xavier Wozniak, Graham Ward, James Walton, Joe Tyler, Trace, Krishna Simone say yes, Andy Shockney, Ross Sandberg, Chance Russo at Drago Russo, Vladimir Prenner from Croatia, Robert Pasley, Post Fiction RPG Audio, Mighty Zeus, Mike Olson, Tom Nelson of the Deck of Player Safety fame, Falcon Neal, Shawn Malley, the Micro Ant, Eric Mengi, the Mathemagician, Chad Lench, Jim Klingler, aka DM Prime Mover, Brian King, Chad Jackson, Sean Hurst, sorry, I forgot the T. Ben Heisler and Paige Lightman, The Mighty Jerd, Nathan Fuller, Andy Edmonds at nerdronomicon.com, Seth Eckel, Darren Chandler, Evil John, Merrick Blackman, Steve Bissonette, Craig Bailey, Lou Anders of Lazy Wolf Studios, and Keith Ammon of The Monsters Know What They're Doing. Thank you so much for your support. You, listener, can become a patron by going to patreon.com/masteringdnd. You can also help us out by going to Apple Podcast or wherever you listen to this podcast and leave a review. Also, if you go to YouTube and look at YouTube/@Mastering you can subscribe there. We're almost at 2,000 subscribers. So if you go there, just click that subscribe button. Help us out. Teos, where can people find you?
Find me at alphastream.org. My full intention, in amongst everything else that I have to do this week, is to do my lessons from Emerald City Comic Con blog, which I'm dying to because I found it totally fascinating. So I'm excited to share that. But
Can't wait to hear about that. You can find me on all the social medias at Shawn Merwin. You can find the podcast stream, whatever we're doing here itself, at Mastering D&D on many social media platforms.
I have no idea what we're doing here.
Exactly. Or just go to YouTube and you can see us in all our glory talk about games. So we're done with Shadowdark. You're back safely at home with a torch in hand. What are we going to do now?
I'm going to close out my story arc today on the carpet. Remember that carpet I mentioned? It's coming today.
Ah,
I have a
yes.
carpet. It took us forever to choose. The culmination of the story arc plays out today. I'm pretty sure we're going to level up as a household. They're delivering a carpet. I rolled up the old one yesterday. My back feels it. So that was the reverse XP loss. I don't know. That's what I'm doing, Shawn. How about you?
I am going to envy your carpet.
Sounds dirty.
It always is. The carpet, that is.